So this is a piece that I painted, I guess it was in 2017 or 18, I can't even remember now. Um, and I was excited that Danielle, created this opportunity to focus on the theme of each other because this is a painting that I painted of my daughter, in fact. The one that is on the floor is my child, Leah. And this captured her within the first moments of, entering a cabin at a camp up in Vermont that she attended that summer. And, as a mom, taking your kids to camp, you have a lot of high hopes and expectations for them to have this amazing experience, where they're going to have a lot of growth and obviously interactions with other people. And, the anticipation of how they fall into place is, always, you just never know how it's going to work. So anyways, we walked into the space and right away she just got down on the floor next to this girl that she barely knew. And the girl was open to having her, borrow her markers, and they were coloring in coloring pages. And, these are older girls too. So obviously coloring pages have become more trendy and acceptable. But it was a really sweet moment of kind of an invitation and acceptance between two people. And, I, as an artist, I also loved the light that was captured, and just the sense of space. I loved the glow of the trees outside of this shack in the woods. And it was just, something that I'm holding on to. I asked my daughter, I said, how do you feel about this painting? Would you like me to sell it, or would you like to keep it? Oh, she said, oh, I'm keeping this one, Mom. You can't sell this. So I was excited to have an opportunity to share it with you, as it will be, a continued private collection in our family, which I'm happy about. So that's sort of the story about this painting.
Was she about your daughter around 12, 13, 14?
I know she was probably 14.
I love that how you captured that age with the long-leggedness that
Oh yeah,
they have at that age. They just shoot up all of a sudden, and their bodies are a little awkward and too
yeah,
long for what they're used to.
yes, the lanky legs for sure.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful moment, and you're right about the lighting. I mean, it just you can feel yourself transported there, and the depth of the piece. Like there's a warmth that you can feel, which I'm imagining it was probably a warm day.
Yes, I think it was.
And it matches up with the warmth between the two of them, and the hopes. You can definitely feel that, they're both hopeful, nervous, all the things that come along with doing an adventure like that. I definitely can put myself back in those moments, and
Yeah, that
and
awkward
yeah.
introduction.
Mm.
I love the light. I love that light in it, that the contrast and the diagonal lines of the wood.
Yeah, I love the composition too, like the diagonal of the floors, and then the diagonal of that window pane coming down. Did you end up like cropping? Because you worked from a photo, right?
Yes, I
Did you
did.
end up cropping it and kind of doing that on purpose, or was that just something that happened?
I think it happened more or less.
Yeah.
I think that's usually how it works, but I can't remember if I edited, some of the background. but mostly, I think that was kind of the way it presented itself to me, you know. And I know, you know, that I as much as this is a realist kind of view of a moment in time, you know, it doesn't really play into like an impression, but I'm not one for, you know, I know that like my lines are kind of a little wonky and there's this vulnerability, if you will, in that moment. And it just kind of lends itself to, you know, that the chaos of sort of, yeah, its own reality, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not one for perfection necessarily in you know making sure everything's plumb, but I like the essence of how the lines interacted with one another, with the wood and yeah, and the big window. So
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and I love how, you know, technically how you painted the fabrics. I also am drawn to the way fabrics appear, and you feel the weight of it, and it yeah, it really is beautiful, especially the one in the background just hanging down, and then the curtains hanging down, and even that bed in the background. It, you know, they're not perfect because it's that summer camp feel.
yeah, nothing's put together, right? I know.
Yeah, really nice.
Thank you so much.
It's beautiful.
All right. Anyone else have questions or comments?
How many layers of oil do you use in there?
You know, I don't even know. I tend to work fast, and I fill the canvas pretty quickly. So I'm not one that has like a systematic approach to, you know, adding. It's not like I do the tonal work underneath and then build up. It all kind of comes together pretty quickly. So this painting is not very thick in paint. I mean, it's I was able to get it, you know, all painted in. So, you know, I think the skin tones and things like that, you know, are built up as skin tones tend to need that. But generally, it's, you know, I don't think there's too many layers. It's not a real thick coat of paint.
It's amazing what you do with the light.
Thank you.
Yeah, really nice. Well, thank you for sharing, Cynthia. I mean, sorry, I was just texting with Cynthia. Thank you for sharing, Christy.
Yes, no problem. Happy to be part of it.
Yeah, this is great. These two are Rachel's beautiful works. And fun fact, this one was actually chosen for the in-person show, but then she sold it. So so we switched it up to have her other piece in the in-person show, but still have this in the VR, which is one of the fun parts of the VR. We can have our pieces out in the world, but still enjoy it here in this gallery.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I am in the process of relocating from Kansas to Pennsylvania. And as part of that, you know, I had several of my paintings for sale, and they rarely sell, but it did. So I was like, oh, okay, well, oops, you know. So, and all this happened, you know, after I had entered this show. So I'll talk about the one on the left first.
Great.
So both of these pieces are a departure from what I had previously been doing. I've always been into drawing portraits, but I always did portraits in graphite. And so I really wanted to try colored pencil out. I had done colored pencil and some other things before, but not to this detail. So this piece on the left with the two women in an embrace is the first big colored pencil piece I did. And what it is the portrait, the two women, that's drawn on thick Bristol paper. And then that piece of paper is then mounted on a cradled wooden panel, and that background gradient that was painted with acrylic. So I had the panel, I primed it, just the face, the edges are still wood. And then I primed it, and then I did the paint blue to kind of a cream white gradient, and then I glued the drawing then on top of it. I've always been very much of a mixed media artist. I like how the different textures reflect light. I like, putting areas of flatness like this gradient against detail. These are all things that are like just aesthetically attractive to me. So I made this piece and I was like really, really excited about it. And so I wanted to continue the work, and so the second piece I made in the colored pencil is the next piece over here, and you get a little bit more of the bodies. The faces and the arms are in colored pencil, and then the shirt in the back of the back person is collage. The shirt in the front is a mix of paint and collage, and both of their jeans are actually done with ink. And again, that's all layered then on a panel that has this like primed acrylic. And so I was really excited about these pieces. I did these two, and then I did a similar one just in all black and white. And then the most recent pieces I've done in this series have more of a domestic background. So it's women in the home or in this outdoor garden space. I'm trying to think about like new ideas around queer domesticity. I like if some or all of the people in my images are androgynous. And I like that their relationships are often tender and intimate in a way, but necessarily not defined, because historically same-sex female couples have lived in that liminal space of, oh, they're sisters, they're best friends, they're two old spinsters or whatever. And so you don't know. And in some ways that gives it a bit of historic erasure, which is problematic. But in other ways, it's allowed lesbians historically to get around being, indicted and prosecuted in the ways that men have, homosexual men in history. So it's kind of a double-edged sword with this ambiguity of relationships. And so even though I'm using contemporary models and contemporary settings in this series, we still have that same kind of, come home to Christmas with your partner and everybody introduces them as your roommate type of moment. And I like to keep the openness so where the viewer can read into how they want to read into it. So that's kind of the background of these pieces.
When you said that you put acrylic on the back, especially on the previous one, does the acrylic come through the paper, or do you cut out around it?
So the acrylic, that's a great question. So the acrylic is just really matte, flat acrylic. I use kind of, I don't like the shiny gloss acrylics. And so I painted that gradient with a type of roller that you would use on a cabinet because it makes it really soft. This other one is very flat, but the paper I use is the Bristol paper, and it's super thick. And it's very durable, so it's not transparent at all. And so when I glue that paper down to the acrylic, you can't see any of the background coming through the image at all.
So how come I'm seeing it? That's what I'm confused about. How come I'm seeing the blue and the fade to... It wasn't that done on the board?
Yes, I'm not.
And then the Bristol board was put over it?
Paper? I'm not seeing where you're seeing it.
Well, it appears to me as if the figures are in the foreground, and
Yes.
And So I can't figure out if the paper is so thick that it doesn't come through, how come I'm seeing the blue and white background that you did? Did you do that afterwards?
No, so the blue and white background I did first, and then I cut the figures out.
Oh, that's what I was wondering.
Okay, yeah, sorry, there's a miscommunication. I apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted there to have that background, and so yeah, the figures in both cases are cut out and then pasted.
Thank you.
That must have been a nerve-wracking moment. I've had to take an X-Acto out with work that I've worked a long time on, and it's always scary, right?
Right, and the thing is like in these images of them, you can't see, but there is a depth difference because it's not like copy paper that would somewhat lay very flat. There's an edge, and so while, example for the afro on this first one, I could go in with some pencil and some colored pencil and like make that afro bigger into the background, and I did that a little bit. It's still, you can see a demarcation between the paper and the background, you know? So it wasn't a seamless blend. But I will say this, a tip for this kind of layering is that the edge of the Bristol paper, I colored that edge as well with either browns or peaches or oranges or blacks. And so that really made the edge invisible then when I glued it down. Because at first you could see this white edge if you stood to either side, which was really distracting. And so, yeah, I had to color match each edge to whatever color it needed to be on the picture for both of these. And that solved it.
Wow. And it is kind of crazy, guys. If you go way up in this space, you can actually see what she's talking about. And I have the other piece in my gallery, and I noticed that too, how seamless you've made it up here. And it makes sense now that that's how you achieved that, because you can feel that it's collaged, but it also feels like it's done so smoothly.
Thanks. I've really thought, about this series moving forward. Would it be interesting to, for example, on this piece with the two women very up close, would it have been interesting to mount them on a piece of like thin wood and have them distinctly pop off the background? Or would have that kind of aired into the side of like a gimmick? I don't know. I liked how this turned out really well, and I was afraid to push it the other way because it's like, okay, once I start working with layers of wood on wood, then in depths, like, does it end up being cartoony or I don't know.
Yeah, that might be interesting to try in like a small scale model or something. It's so hard when you have to make those decisions. And I mean, I'm sure with the paper you're working with, it's not like you can try it out. And like it's probably, even though Bristol's really thick, it's still fragile, right?
Paper, like a paper gradient, then I glued down, and then I glued the figures on top. And then over time, that background paper was thin, and so it bubbled like over the course of a year. And so I had to pull it all off, and it was so scary. But I used like a very low heat hair dryer and got everything off. And then that's why I was like, I'm just painting the backgrounds because that's stable, and I'm going to do that from now on. The paper on paper, the thick paper on thin paper, it was like, that was a no for sure. But yeah, the other one didn't have necessarily that many complications because I had painted the background in the beginning. I'd actually painted it a darker color and then didn't like it, so I changed it to this lighter color, which I think makes the figures pop more. And then that shirt in the background is mostly collage, but it's that kind of blue paper with like anchors on it. It was pretty thick, and so this one didn't have any kind of like wear or duration, issues that, different glues and stuff might have. So it's held up really well.
I love the difference between the flat areas and the really textured and the shapes of the faces. Like you do really, really beautiful work with the the faces showing contour and form. It's really, really nice contrast and juxtaposition. You know, I like that a lot.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's you know, I was thinking about like one of my favorite artists of all time is Gustav Klimt, and it's because he has these like very luscious fleshy fleshes and then these flat backgrounds. And from like I discovered him when I was like a teenager, and so since then I think all of my work echoes like this flatness versus depth. I don't know, I think it's just really, really visually interesting. And then I know you can't see it in this VR, but the colored pencils, you know, because they're so waxy, they give this rich luminosity. Oh, artists talk, but it's like materials, you know, like, oh, yes. I love this picture. I love this crunchiness, you know, or whatever.
Actually, I've been meaning to ask you, what brand of colored pencils are you using here?
It's Prismacolor mostly.
Really? Okay.
I looked into colored pencils when I was gonna go, you know, big like this.
Yeah.
And I ended up erring on the side of Prismacolor, and they've worked really great for me. And then now, like, one of my neighbors is an artist who's retired, and she gave me like literally a bucket full of them. So I guess I'm gonna stick with it for the next, you know, 400 years until I use them all up. But I've really liked them. It's just, you know, slow, very thin layers to blend, and when you think you're done, then you know you kind of seal it all off with either the white or a light color or with a blender, and then it meshes all those layers together in a beautiful way. But if you're not right, then you're in trouble, you know. But yeah.
I have another question about art materials. What adhesive did you find to be the best one? Because I love doing collage too, but I kind of struggle with the adhesive.
The thing that I ended up getting to work the best for this, again, the thick paper really was the godsend here, because that thin paper, regardless of the adhesive, with thin paper in the past, this is like in the far past, I've used like, God, what is that stuff called? Like it's very thin and stinky. You use it for like office type stuff. I've used that, but it tends to peel. For these, the best thing I found was like Aleene's tacky glue or whatever. And I applied it with little bitty paint brushes and sometimes my finger to rub in thin edges. But sacrifice some of those old paint brushes to get like a really, really thin spread, especially up to the edge. But the Elmer's and then the other ones, like, contact kind of cement is what I was thinking of. I love contact cement for thin papers, but I have never got it to last long time. And I would hate, you know, to send one of these pieces home with somebody and then the figures fall off like a year later. So yeah, the Aleene's tacky glue was the best.
I would not have guessed that it's ink, but it just looks like jeans. I feel like I could touch it.
Yeah, so I actually shaded out the jeans on both sides with graphite first, and then I put the ink over it, and yeah, that on the texture of that slightly textured panel, I was like, wow, that really worked out well. But there is a graphic shade, like a graphite shaded layer under that, and then I fixed it like fixative, and then I inked on top, and so you have some various textures happening.
You can feel them, or I feel like I can feel them.
Yeah, really fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
And I also really love the, conceptually how you're talking about the idea that female friends, female relatives can all be close like that, and how it is a double-edged sword for, if this is your sexual preference and you want it to be known that this is your, this is your partner, that there's not always, it's not always obvious. And it's interesting how you say that sometimes is helpful, but sometimes isn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, I mean, if the family especially or the friends, like if they want to push, if they want to overlook it, I feel like they, can in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. And
Yeah, really beautiful. And you can feel the weight too of the figure in the front leaning on that figure in the back. And when you said Klimt, it like that's really like it's amazing. I can see now where you draw that inspiration because I love that contrast between the flat and I don't know if do you do graphic design as well, because I feel like you you have a really good sense of like what would be used in graphic design as well. Like,
oh, thank you. No, I don't. And I actually have a very difficult time color matching. And so
oh,
oftentimes when I plan my pieces, I'll go online and look at different color schemes. Like
uh-huh.
I know that I want to use these two skin tones here, which is like a deeper red brown and then a lighter yellow brown for the skin tones.
Yeah.
And I know that there needs to be a blue element. So I'll actually like Google different color schemes with these colors
Oh wow.
to see where I want to go, because I mean, I can see the colors, okay, I'm not colorblind. I just am not gifted in matching them intuitively. So
Wow.
I try to make a lot of sketches ahead of time. And like I said, this one we had a more bright blue background that was like almost an ultramarine, and it just really seemed to disrupt it. And so I went back and repainted it to like, and this I like much better because it provides this kind of background foreground more. It's not competing then with the figures like the dark ones. So color, thank you, but color's it's very hard for me to do.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't know it. And I love that because I think a lot of us it's like our instinct to say that we're naturally gifted or, everything comes easy, and it's really refreshing when we all talk about how it's not all necessarily coming to us easily, and it makes sense to go for the resources that we can use to build upon that. And really, really such beautiful pieces. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have questions for Rachel?
I do. Rachel, when you look at Klimt, do you think about the patterns? Because pattern is such a large part of his paintings. And think about the way you're combining the patterns of the clothes, like in particularly in this piece.
I love pattern, but Klimt's pattern and his color use with pattern is really like off-putting to me. Like I like the fleshy figures in contrast with the flat and pattern spaces, but he usually uses like very geometric, like almost long squares, rectangles, and things like that. And then he usually uses like very jarring like golds and warms and patterning, and I don't like that at all. Pattern in most of my most current work here. This is not an exact pattern because I've hand cut and placed the flowers, but it's supposed to like allude to a pattern shirt. But the background like shirt is more of an exacting pattern. So I do love pattern versus, then the blank, like the flesh and then the flat grounds. But I use pattern, I feel like, in a really different way. But yeah, the floral patterns, soft floral patterns are my most favorite of all. Like in my newest work, they have those in them as usually like wallpaper. So I try to place pattern where pattern would go, like on clothes, on wallpaper.
Right.
And so, but yeah, I like it a lot. That's a great question. I had not made that connection, but yeah, I love a pattern, but his pattern's like, though I will say, like, there's this painting that's like portrait of Mata Primavesi or something, and she's in like a rhythmic floral atmosphere, and of course I like that because it's kind of it's in floral. So
I mean, I think his patterns go beyond the bounds of like the figure, and they become the figure and the ground. So it's interesting that you want to contain them and use them more realistically, I guess.
Yeah, I do. I'm thinking about my newest work 'cause it's even more patterned, and so there's more of a competition, but there's never like a subsume of the figure to the
Yeah.
pattern.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because in the end of the day, I'm a figurative artist. And I
Right.
want the like fleshy flesh to be the
Right.
star of the show. But yeah.
I get a question. So do you suggest your models what to wear, or is that what they happen to be wearing, or is it not what they were wearing at all?
So with these two paintings or pieces, they were made during the pandemic, and so the pictures I used were from an online portal where models and artists upload their pictures for free use for artists. And so I pulled those. I did not take these shots myself. I pulled them from a free like repository because pandemic. I asked some of my friends and everybody was like, no way, and so I definitely plan to have real models going forward, but it's just been hard.
Yeah.
But in both of these images, they were wearing something else.
Okay.
I think these two figures, I think the one in the back was wearing jeans, but everything else is completely different on both of the images as far as like their clothing. I rendered it kind of from what I wanted it to be.
Yeah, because I love that, push-pull between the feminine and the masculine. And, yeah, or I assume that's maybe what you were going for.
Yeah, I like those contrasts. Like, I wanted them to both still kind of be androgynous, especially the figure in the back.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I like, again, coming back to the pattern, like an organic versus a more set pattern, these kind of visual interests. So my first sketch of this had the background dirt be a gradient and then the foreground be a solid. It was just too much solid. So that white and red floral helps to give it a lot more air in this piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And
great questions. Thank you all so much for having me and everything.
All right, so we can make our way over here. And it's actually a good transition because Cynthia also has some amazing patterning going on here. I'll let you take it away.
What would you like me to talk about?
Oh, sure. So it's totally up to you if you'd like to talk about concept, about your technique, or you could just have us all look at it and take questions.
Sure. My concept is I basically started with digital collages. I had made a book called Aging Raging, which was took sort of a walk through my life, and I made a digital collage for each one. And this came out of sort of young motherhood, that time period in my life. And I decided I wanted to paint them and change them and just sort of continue working with those images. So this is a big canvas, and I kind of just painted, I painted certain elements of the digital collage. And I obviously also use a lot of pattern. Yeah, and I pull patterns from my life and from just ideas I have. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. I'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah, if you could take my questions. It's the kind of work that it's here in the gallery with me, and the more I look at it, the more I come up with these wild thoughts, or people have asked me what it means, and of course, it's all subjective. I'm sure you appreciate having some mystery, um, but I gotta know: is that so? Is this supposed to be like a dream sequence, and is that man supposed to be like a gladiator, or what?
Yes, that man's a gladiator.
Okay.
He is a gladiator toy that
Ah,
I bought at the Coliseum. And
wow.
So
I originally started with the woman on the couch. For
Okay.
some reason, her figure really, she was so, she was like so dreamy. And when I made the collage, I sort of wanted it to have that feeling that the pattern that was coming out of her head and connecting the other two figures
Mm.
were things she was thinking about. And then, you know, these things are mysterious to me too. I put them together and I think, yeah, that works, that doesn't work, but I can't really articulate why. But the more I look at this one, the more I think it's kind of a family unit. And the father, the gladiator, is disappearing into the background. The pattern is painted over him in certain areas, and the girl is obviously awake and I think asking for attention. That's about like sort of as far as I've gotten with it. I don't
Yeah.
really want to pick it apart
Sure.
because I don't want to have to explain everything to myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of as far as I've gone. I think the jewels are, you know, indicate a certain richness. I think the pom-poms on the top are very much like a theatrical framing device, but that's kind of as far as I've gotten. I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks.
Thank you.
what type of flowers are those? Do you know?
Which ones?
Are those flowers coming out from her head?
Oh, yeah, that's from actually a tablecloth. And those are white tulips.
Yeah, this gives me a feeling. It might be because my daughter just asked me to watch it yesterday. We watched Alice in Wonderland, so I think looking at this now after watching that, I feel like it's a cross between that and like Mad Men, and that. So you know the whole dream sequence of Alice in Wonderland, and it just now it's just in the forefront when I'm looking at this. But I don't know if that's something that was.
Start questioning myself about it. I paint it less well. And that sometimes it's just better to go with it, see what happens, which I find very frightening, but I try to do anyway. Does anyone else have that experience?
I was going to say, this is Christy, Cynthia, and this is just a compelling piece of art. I love it. There's so much to talk about. But I think absolutely, like, as I start to figure out what kind of artist I am or continue to figure out what kind of artist I am,
Right.
That's when I feel the most of who I am as an artist, when I try to shut everything off, you know,
Right,
and just
right.
really get into the flow. And that's when I feel like I'm as authentic as I possibly can be. So I'm not near as creative or vulnerable in like the content of what I'm putting out there as you are with all that you've added into this painting. I'm not as risky, but it's really cool to see how it all comes together. And I saw it in person in the gallery, and it's stunning. I mean, you know, you can't not, you know, be captured by its presence in the gallery too. So it was really
Agreed.
fun.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I like that there's a little cat family in this family as well. But yeah, this is Rachel, and of course I love the patterns. Things like this with the colors and the patterns to me just feel so alive and lively and vibrant and attractive. Like this is the exact kind of color palette and thing that I am drawn to. And it's definitely like, you know, with her sleeping on the couch there, it's like a dream state. And so I think that leaves a lot of room for the viewer to just kind of guess, what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or imagine what, it's like as these flowers are like actively blooming out. So it seems like this is all kind of coming into focus and going out of focus. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's an active thing that's happening right here. And I think that if you didn't have that kind of shape of the emergence of those flowers, that it would feel more static with the other patterns. But those tell me that this is seen in action.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I have to say, like, I really love color, and I really love red and yellow, and everything that I do has got a ton of red and yellow in it. And people are always like, "Could you tone it down?" And I always think, "No, why would I tone it down? I'm going to use this red straight out of the tube."
Yeah, no, please don't tone it down.
And the colors are done so well here because so many times, like someone that like what we would be like a rainbow color palette can be like really not working. But here, because you have like each little area has its own color scheme, and so I feel like that makes it jive together well. And there is like a unity throughout, like the reds throughout and the yellow at the top and the like almost a triangle of yellow, right? So there's a lot of balance, but because you haven't just like made every area rainbow, it gives like a sense of space and of movement. And it's like it's really well done.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. I love the curving cats, the way they're sort of curving around each other. And I love the just utter exhaustion in the woman laying on the couch. That totally says motherhood to me.
Also, the fabulous dress and the gloves too, right?
Yes.
Right?
As if we could wear those, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I really like playing with color, I have to say, and I
agree with Rachel though. There is a control to your chaos that you within those areas of bright, you do marry the colors pretty well. There's areas where you can go and get some break from the really bright.
Yeah, and those two cats, so I have boy-girl twins, and those two cats, it's actually a lamp that my brother gave me. So when you turn it on at night, you just see glowing eyeballs.
Oh, no.
Wow.
If I buy the painting, can I have the lamp too?
No, that lamp's not going anywhere.
I have two little chihuahuas, and one's small and fat, and one's tall and sleek, and I was like, man, I need to start putting them in things.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, whenever I like have a blank space or can't figure out what to do, I paint a lamp in there or, something I pick up from, from my house, it just, because it's like filling in a space. And I feel like if the thing belongs there, it belongs there because it's part of my day-to-day life. And I always feel a compulsion to somehow reference domestic space because that's been my world for a long time.
Wow.
So I'm never going to be out there painting landscapes. It's just
absolutely fabulous. I would never have guessed those kitties were based on a lamp.
No, me either. But I love it. I want to just zoom in on that woman on the couch, and like I feel like you could have like a diptych here and have a second one of her, and I want to see how the story goes on. It's compelling.
Yeah, I have been doing like a series kind of. I have that girl in another painting that I'm working on now. And I sometimes feel a little guilty to use that girl over and over because she's also in a third painting. Ooh. And then I thought, you know what? If this girl is so compelling to me, I should just paint her until I'm sick of her.
Does she always stand on coffee tables?
No, I don't think so. No, in the current one, she's like in a cityscape looking in a theater.
I love how they're standing on the table because it gives you this kind of sense of imbalance, but then all the colors bring your balance back together.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into what are you posting these on Instagram?
Yeah, I'm a sort of a terrible Instagram person.
That's okay.
But the Aging Raging book is, I've been posting photos all along on Instagram, and then also on my website, you can page through the book.
Okay.
And see the other paintings that have come out of it. Really, this is, I think, the second or third one that's come out of that digital collection. But for some reason, doing all that work, like I was just shoving stuff in these collages, and then it was like a year later, and I was like, oh wait, that was like a notebook for me or a sketchbook for me in a lot of ways, and I kind of want to revisit it and see what I did and see what still means something to me now. So that's kind of what I'm working on now.
Awesome. Well, I'm recording this for everybody, and when I post, I'll ask each of you if you want me to post a link to your website or a link to Instagram. But it is always fun when we're talking about what's beyond the show, if we can follow up and keep an eye on what you're working on.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
That would be great. I'd love to see the book or parts of it.
Awesome. Anyone else have questions?
I've been painting for a long time. I also had a long spell of stopping because my wife and I adopted some children that were HIV positive, and one of them developed severe disabilities in her first year of life. And that kind of made being able to paint in a consistent way not possible. So I set it aside until I could retire. And I have retired recently. Of course, COVID, along with a lot of other people, pushed me into retirement. So I'd say probably for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been painting pretty seriously and pretty steadily. In 2012, I started painting, had a brush with cancer, and decided to not wait completely until I retired, and started painting again a little more seriously. So in some ways, I've been painting a long time, and in others, I haven't. So I feel like in many ways, I've just in the last year or two found my sea legs with painting again. So for that long period that I couldn't find time to paint, I started taking a lot of photos, digital photography, and at one point my camera broke. One of my daughters had picked up my camera and put it down wrong and broke the lens. So out of sort of frustration and a need for some kind of art in my daily life, I started playing in Photoshop with all those thousands and thousands of photos I'd been taking. And one of my favorite ways to take pictures was what I like to call a drive-by. I would drive home from work or drive to work or be driving somewhere and have the camera in my hand and be shooting out the window, especially as people sort of walked by. It's amazing how different we hold ourselves when we think nobody's watching. And there's just something to the physicality of a person either standing on a street corner waiting for a bus or walking down the street. As time went on, by the way, I had to stop doing that because I'm 67, and honestly, driving down the street with a camera in my hand just got to be too dangerous. So I don't do it anymore, but I have tons and tons and tons of photos to work from, as well as all those collages I did in Photoshop.
Wow.
So those collages have sort of become my source. for my works. And the nice thing about that is I can go back and make different decisions about things. Take things out, put new things in, bury things. That was one of the nice things about working in Photoshop. I could work in layers. As a child, one of my favorite things to do with the old plastic Kodak cameras, where you had to wind it to the next picture in the film before it would take, you could choose to not wind those and take double exposure photos easily. And I did a lot of that with my brother. We'd experiment when we were little. So I've always loved the idea of layering images and hiding one thing and bringing something else to the surface. I think it's just a great metaphor for life.
Yes.
I'd like to also make a comment about all the news these days about the AI generators and people being able to put in a sentence of what they want to see. And then a computer generator generating the image. And is that art or is it not in somebody's artwork?
Yes.
But that being said, what occurred to me when I first heard that was that that's a conversation everyone had about photography. And if you don't think that the invention and propagation of photography threw the world of art for a loop, it did. It's what gave us Cubism and a lot of other wonderful experiments. The Dada folks, Duchamp. So concentrating on movement being a theme, this is going to shake visual artists up and visual art up in a really good way. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and just wait and see. And what I'm encouraged to do, and also from other folks in this show, I loved seeing how people are combining, combining materials.
Yes.
In a way that hasn't been in the past. And I think that that's more of what we'll see coming up.
Yes.
With this sort of, I can make a sentence and a computer can make an image for me.
Yes.
Well, but I see some of you guys in this show working on vellum, and it's just incredible. So you make me want to run out and buy vellum. I kept away from other artists and other art for a long time because it broke my heart to not be able to go home and make art every day. But now that I can, my head is up and I'm looking around, and I've got to say, all of you in this show really made me just want to sit down at the easel and work. And you've all inspired me. And reading about the different ways you've put elements together really got me excited. So thank you to all of you also in the show. I can't pick any one piece I like more than another. You're all bringing something different to the game, and I appreciate it. And thanks for the inspiration.
That's so great. I'm so glad you're so inspired.
So, are there any questions?
Let's see. Let's see. Are all your references from photos?
If there are no questions, I'll just say that I spent a lot of time, many years, working on collages, digital collages, and you can find them. And yes, all of my references are from my own photos. In some cases, I've taken photos of my father's photos. So for instance, the woman in the wedding dress is my mother. And
Oh, wow.
that's a photo that my father took of her and some of her neighbors on her wedding day. And yes, I feel like for me personally, it's important that I take the photo and use the photo that I took for my work, or it doesn't feel authentic.
I feel the same way.
In this case, both of my parents married to escape horrible home lives.
Wow.
And ended up, if it was a different time, they probably would have gotten divorced.
Wow.
So that's partly why that's sort of the theme in the center of this being called exit strategy. For both of them, it was a way to exit really difficult, horrible lives to marry. I don't think it worked. Certainly, it didn't work out very well. They ended up with way more kids than they wanted, and they had no clue of what to do with any of us. And we all turned to art, all my siblings and I, to sort of survive, lack of a better way to put it, which is a really great thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and I keep trying to think of ways to pass that on. That gift, the gift of being able to lose yourself in art. I haven't done it yet, but I'm sort of, for myself personally, watching the clock tick. And you can go to my website, and thank you. I'm glad I'm painting again, too.
Yes.
You can go to my website and look at the paintings I've done, most of which I consider studies instead of actual art. This is one of the few that I'd call art. The rest are just sort of studies or practice. And my website is, I think it's Riedel, Riedel, art.
Great. I'll share the link too.
WordPress.com.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Sorry, I'm afraid you're going to have to probably edit some of this.
No worries at all.
Good soul for doing this.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.